I'll start the recording.
Good morning. We're just allowing everybody to come in. I'm so excited that all of you can join us to talk about something that I'm really excited about. We'll have Q&A at the end of the session, but thank you for joining us at the U.S. Hydrogen Alliance. We're so proud to present our State Hydrogen Policy Readiness Index, and it is our U.S. hydrogen economy gauge. I want to first make sure that we introduce our staff. My name is Roxana Beck-Mohammadi. I'm the founder and executive director of the U.S. Hydrogen Alliance. I founded the organization in 2020 as the Western States Hydrogen Alliance. We became national at the end of 2021, once the hubs were understood to be a national priority. And I've been very lucky to be joined by Lexi and Tanishka, and I'm going to let them introduce themselves.
Great. Thanks, Roxana. My name is Lexi Schnell. I am our Policy and Communications Manager. I started out at USHA as a fellow back in 2022 and have been with USHA full-time since 2023. So I handle all of our state policy, federal regulatory, and a bunch of other things. And we're really excited to present this work to you today. Tanishka, I'll hand it over to you.
Hey. Hi, my name is Tanishka, and I'm a policy fellow, and I've been with USHA since September, and I've been helping create this publication. I'm a current senior at American University, and I'm studying international studies and economics. So thank you all for joining us.
I want to thank both of them for their great work on this publication. I want to also thank our membership and our members for supporting this work, giving us their feedback, and essentially allowing us to do this work from the very beginning. And we'll tell you a little story about how this all came about. But first, I'm going to tell you a little bit about who we are as the United States Hydrogen Alliance, or we call ourselves belovedly USHA. We are a 501c6 nonprofit membership association, and we are advocating for hydrogen across all 50 states on a state-by-state basis. And I just want to give a shout out to our members. We're really thankful for all of their contributions to the work that you're seeing today. We do serve the hydrogen industry through our political advocacy. I like to say that we work offensively on the state side and defensively on the federal side. And we don't do this in a vacuum. We understand that market development and workforce development and community building is part of the entire story in order to build successfully a U.S. hydrogen economy. And so we take it seriously to systems engineer the U.S. hydrogen economy with all of our activities. I would say that policy is really where we have built our expertise. And really, I like to think of us as a hydrogen think tank. My highest aspiration, which has been confirmed and supported by our board over the last over 5 years of our inception, is to harmonize and at least, if not homogenize U.S. policy across the U.S. when it comes to hydrogen. And that way we can avoid a fragmented 50-state policy patchwork that is quite expensive and it not only creates vulnerability within the hydrogen industry, but also for the country, because hydrogen does solve a number of issue areas for this country. And that is why we'll be talking a little bit more about our national campaign, Hydrogen, the Common Bond. So we have influenced 19 pieces of legislation. That means that those are bills that we've actually written ourselves. However, even though those are enacted laws, we are tracking legislation across the U.S., which we'll see further, and we are influencing those pieces of legislation based on our support, opposition, or other activities. The other way that we work closely with policymakers is not just through advocacy, but through education. And we do this through our Hydrogen Policy Leaders Convention since we've been holding since 2022. And To date, we have had 4 events. We've had 41 states represented, and we've interacted specifically with 179 policymakers from across the country. And that does not include our typical 9,000 legislator outreach campaign that we do every single year. So our common bond campaign is really critical for us as we realized things were dying down with 45V and that we were losing some momentum. It was really important for us to really look at what's in our horizon. And it was truly to get the states coordinated to take action quickly and in a manner that would be easy for us as an industry to handle. So that was where the systems engineering came into place. But we also saw all the different ways that hydrogen creates opportunities for states and the policies that they are currently enacting. And I think a lot of us are well aware of some of our energy issues in the country, workforce development, stagnation, other kinds of factors that hydrogen can play a significant role in. So we launched this national state-by-state strategic campaign last September at our National Policy Leaders Convention in Denver, Colorado. So this is our vision statement for the campaign. We think that this is quite important. We've shared this with policymakers, and it's also a way to really have the hydrogen industry anchor into something that um, is is important for this country. And it is to reintroduce hydrogen simply not as an energy carrier, but as a symbolic, practical, and structural bond across sectors, geographies, and generations to enhance America's energy, environment, economy, and security. Those are important considerations for the country. And if anyone has seen me before on stage, I've always advocated that we, as the hydrogen industry, understand hydrogen in a political context because that is our why. That's our justification for existing because we can solve problems. And that is, again, what this campaign is all about and really disseminating that to all affected stakeholders. So we have a number of strategic goals, and I'll go over them really quickly, but really what we're focused on, and really this is what we've been focused on since our inception, is to accelerate hydrogen deployment across the US. And typically we like to focus on hydrogen built at scale. We love to highlight and incentivize hydrogen's interconnectedness with other energy sources, and that's going to be really important as we talk about tangential policy in the coming presentation. We're here to establish and harmonize policies, and we specifically do have a definition for clean hydrogen that we have disseminated across the country to policymakers and some industry. Please contact us if you want access to that. We certainly have been focused on positioning hydrogen as a synergistic tool, and we're going to continue doing that through multiple methods. And then lastly, we want to ensure that hydrogen policy is practical and impactful, and it's really important to make sure that policies are written in a way where they can be utilized and they can actually move forward a marketplace. So why measure readiness at all? And this was our way to determine how to support a local hydrogen economy developing across the country. But really, I was getting this question every time I was in public by those in the hydrogen industry. What are the top 10 states that we should be focusing on? And I could give folks anecdotal information, but really I thought that it was really important for us to figure out an objective way of answering that question, not just for those that are in the hydrogen industry, but also for our organization and policymakers and other affected stakeholders, especially those in the investment community. So, what we have determined based on our analysis and our work across the US over the last 5 years is that there are essential ingredients for a US hydrogen economy. Number one, there needs to be governance clarity. Who are the regulatory authorities and what are they doing? And some of the things that we've seen with project stalling is that folks don't know who to go to, and then the state is not as responsive to industry to actually push forward their projects. Also, durable policy signals. There needs to be certainty for the private sector in order to invest in hydrogen. But what do we mean by durable? And we've been using this phrase at the US Hydrogen Alliance a lot recently. And this has to do with the swing of essentially political polarization. And we all know that that is not conducive to the private investment sector. And what we're doing is we're figuring out how to objectively create policies that are durable for those for the polarizing environment that is we all don't know when it will end. So we've learned to adapt, and that's why that is an important ingredient for the U.S. hydrogen economy. We also have cross-sector alignment. Where does hydrogen matter? Who does it matter to? And what you'll see is, again, with tangential policies or more overarching policies where hydrogen is included as a portfolio solution, um, this makes cross-sector alignment that much more important because when we have other sectors advocating with us for the inclusion of hydrogen, we're in a much better place. And then, of course, legislative education engagement. A lot of our discussions are they're starting at the most fundamental level, which is what is hydrogen? Why are we using hydrogen? And how does it affect me? And so we're telling that story over and over in all the states until we develop a very firm foundation for the country to understand why hydrogen is important, and then establishing the policies that are important to help build the US hydrogen economy in a cohesive manner. So, what is the acronym of this tool that we developed? We are calling it SHIPRI. So why is SHIPRI necessary? Well, I would love to say that it's an industry compass. It's allowing us to understand what states are viable for our development and our market development opportunities, but also to really open up all 50 states. I think a lot of folks focus on a couple of states thinking that that is where all the action is, but there's actually many states that have been incubating policy that are supportive of hydrogen, but you might not know about them. And we won't get into all of those states today, but you can always contact us to have a more detailed discussion. The other aspect of it is why SHIPRI is necessary was what I mentioned before, which is, the anecdotal versus the empirical assessment of the states. And to me, it is a little haphazard to just give that anecdotal evidence because it could be a very unique situation where maybe a particular local jurisdiction is fine with hydrogen and there's very little red tape, and then the adjacent district would have such prohibitive issues with a project that it won't let it move forward. So it's hard to say what state is really primed for hydrogen without a deeper dive. The other aspect of, Lexi, can we go back one bit? Okay, thank you. The other aspect of it is to figure out if our policy advocacy is effective, looking at how states are progressing based on the work that we've been doing. So it helps us really figure out as an industry and as USHA how we can better become better advocates for our industry. And again, there's an objective evaluation of the technology acceptance. The more policies that we see, that means that the technology or the understanding of why hydrogen is important is getting through to our policy stakeholders. So this is our approach to a disciplined and comparative way to evaluate our policy maturity across all 50 states. So um, that is how we're using it, but how we hope that you are going to be using it is, for industry, what level of support will the government provide? Is there more or less certainty in a particular state? For policymakers, we've already seen some of their feedback already, which is, how does my state compare regionally and nationally? How do I up that score? What external state policy should we adopt? And then for investors, they're very much concerned about what policy conditions are prime for investment. if I don't have certainty on the federal level, do I have certainty on the state level in order to make sure that I won't lose my money in an emerging technology? So for USHA, how we're specifically using it is actually providing more transparency to the public. We have been working on these tools and have had it in-house, but I think that it's integral at this exact moment in time that we share these tools with the general public for you to also understand what we're seeing on the ground, for you to understand that the hydrogen economy is still being developed, it's still active, and we are seeing seeds sprouting across the US, and we want to show you that today. Again, we're also using this as an assessment of our ability to properly educate and advocate for hydrogen in the past and into the future. I haven't mentioned this yet, but for those of you that are familiar with our work, we actually just recently publicly announced that we have assembled a hydrogen policy leaders roundtable of policymakers from across the country. We have 42 states represented. Most of the roundtable is comprised of lawmakers. The rest of them are in agencies or governor's offices, but they're looking at this metric very seriously, and we're thrilled that they are. It's also been very critical for our membership to decide how they're going to move forward and where they're going to put in projects. So, and lastly, I do think that policy incubation is real for the hydrogen industry to really sink their teeth into. There are states that have lower scores than you would anticipate, but they are constantly talking about how to incorporate hydrogen. That takes time. It takes time to plant seeds and it takes time to see those sprouts. But I anticipate that some of those states are going to jump in their ranking in the near future. Okay, so what are the significant policy indicators? And I'm going to hand it over to Lexi on to continue this discussion.
Great. Thanks, Roxana. So like she just mentioned, I'm going to be talking to you guys about what we are considering significant policy indicators. So policy drivers with explicit and implicit references to hydrogen. So really quickly, I'm just going to talk you through our methodology. The State Hydrogen Readiness Index is built around a set of core indicators that together measure how prepared each state is to support hydrogen deployment and policy development. So in total, the index includes 11 indicators grouped into two main categories. The first group is what we call binary structural policy indicators. There are 9 of these. These indicators capture whether a state has key foundational policy mechanisms in place. Things like renewable portfolio standards, clean fuel standards, Section 177 authority, and other enabling regulatory structures that I will get into in just a moment. Each of these indicators is scored simply as a 1 or a 0, 1 if the policy mechanism exists in that state, and 0 if it does not. The idea here is to measure whether the basic structural framework to support hydrogen is present. The second group consists of quantitative legislative activity indicators. These measure the number of hydrogen-specific or primary bills, as well as hydrogen-related or tangential bills that were introduced or enacted between 2020 and 2025. While the structural indicators tell us whether a state has the foundational architecture in place, these legislative activity indicators capture the depth of engagement, how actively a state legislator is working on hydrogen-related policy. Because states vary significantly in size and legislative capacity, these indicators are scaled to allow for meaningful comparison across states. That way, we're measuring relative engagement rather than just raw volume. Together, these two categories provide a balanced view of both structural readiness and active policy momentum. This lovely diagram was made by Tanishka, and this shows the 11 different indicators we use as benchmarking criteria for hydrogen advancement. And in the next 2 slides, I'm going to break them down for you. So these indicators focus on core market signals. So renewable portfolio standards showed whether hydrogen is formally recognized within clean electricity policy. Clean truck regulations and Section 177 adoption indicated alignment with stronger vehicle emission standards, which expands zero emission markets and supports fuel cell deployment. And clean fuel standards create a carbon intensity credit market, giving hydrogen projects a long-term revenue pathway. Together, these policies signal whether a state is creating real compliance-driven demand. This next slide captures institutional commitment. So a hydrogen roadmap shows that the state has articulated a coordinated strategy. Task force signal structured policy development. Innovative transit rules support early adoption through public procurement. And ZEV mandates create predictable long-term demand for fuel cell vehicles. Collectively, these indicators reflect whether hydrogen is embedded in forward-looking planning. And this last group of indicators measure active engagement. So government initiatives show direct investment through grants or pilot programs. Primary hydrogen legislation reflects bills where hydrogen is the main focus. Tangential legislation captures broader energy or transportation bills that incorporate hydrogen, but it's not the main focus of the bill. Together, they reveal not just structural readiness, but policy momentum. And all 11 of these indicators together help us understand how far along a state is in building the policy foundation needed for hydrogen development. I'm going to pass it back over to Roxana to talk more about understanding legislative signals.
Thank you, Lexi. So the way that we ended up starting this whole SHPRI process was actually through this. For anyone who has seen me present outside publicly, I have constantly come armed with these slides. And what we're going to describe is legislative churn. And this has been really important. Something I've been discussing since my hydrogen lobbying days with my hydrogen lobbying firm is that we need to have legislative proposals in consistently to ensure that policymakers are having to learn about hydrogen. If they have to vote on it, they're going to learn about it. If they don't have to vote on it, they're not going to learn. And so this is about effective advocacy. And let's see if you can move forward. We have been tracking every state on a state-by-state basis since 2020 and beyond. But what's really important for folks to understand is that a lot of the hydrogen industry historically has focused on the regulatory process, really at the end of the road of the entire policy roadmap, or sometimes they've been worried, of course, with respect to compliance and not being able to, overcome some red tape. But really, it all starts in legislatures. And this is why it's important to be active throughout the entire policy landscape. And that's what we do, and that's what we evaluate. So what you'll see is that in 2021, after USHA's inception, we saw that there were only 24 bills introduced across the nation that had to do with hydrogen, and 15 of them were enacted, which you'll see is actually a great percentage. And then the following year, we had 36 introduced and 18 enacted. And you see that the numbers are starting to kind of move across the country. And then in 2023, you see more legislation being introduced and you see higher numbers and more or less around the same regions. But you see that the number of bills being enacted, so enacted means that it became law, has decreased dramatically. And then we go into 2024, and that number skyrockets, and we see so much legislation being introduced. A lot of that has to do with the Biden administration's conversations about hydrogen. All of a sudden, folks want to, include hydrogen in all sorts of different parts of their legislation to be inclusive. And so we see a ramp up of hydrogen legislation. But again, that the number of bills enacted just is tremendously low. And then in 2025, we saw additional activity. It did not skyrocket the same way that it did in previous years. It did not double or triple or quadruple. It increased slightly and we had more bills enacted, but you see there's a lot of activity across the US. So you see this evolution over time that we've been tracking. And we've been trying to convey to the hydrogen industry that it's critical to keep your eye on this because this means that people are interested. The states are interested in developing their local hydrogen economies. The question is, how do we take advantage of this momentum? How do we increase our odds of winning? And that's all we're focused on here at the US Hydrogen Alliance. And then some summary, in summary, we see that over the last 5 years, we had 583 pieces of legislation that was introduced. You can now see that almost every single state introduced legislation touching hydrogen, which is significant. And so now we're seeing that it's not just a California development, it's not just a Texas development, it's not just a DC idea. It is national, it is homegrown, and it's important for us to be paying attention to it. We see that there's 79 bills that were enacted, so 79 laws that touch hydrogen. That passage rate is 14%, which I would say is quite low. And we'll see how that measures up across the states over the last 5 years. So you see that we had passage rates that were in as high as 63% in 2021, and that number decreased drastically. It did improve slightly last year, which is a very positive notion. And I think that the work that we're doing at the United States Hydrogen Alliance is going to help propel that work, especially with our Hydrogen Policy Leaders Roundtable, with the shippery and other activities that we have going on, including Hydrogen the Common Bond campaign. We do see some common policy themes over the last 5 years. We see heavy emphasis on low carbon fuel standards, hydrogen task force, investments in hydrogen transit bus applications, and converting fleets to alternative fuels, and actually some of it heavily on the light duty side. The next slide shows the themes of the years essentially. I won't get into this that much, but why I've kept this slide in here is because I want you to know that as we develop shippery, we're going to give it more dimension. We're going to start really talking about the quality of these bills, the subject areas that they're in. So this was a tough one for me, but we currently do not include the hydrogen hubs in shippery. They are really important to us. We're personally doing a lot of advocacy on the state side to protect the hydrogen hubs. I think that they're vital to the US hydrogen economy. But the problem is the current status of the hydrogen hubs remain unknown. For those of you in the know, you know that there is current litigation based on the two hubs that have been canceled, and there are 5 other ones that are moving forward, some more quickly than others. And we actually have a subcommittee within our policy leaders roundtable focused on protecting the hydrogen hubs. We also know that the funding structures may change. The project scopes are very likely to change for various reasons. And that what we're seeing right now from the state side is that there is fatigue by those in state houses and in governors' offices to protect the hydrogen hubs. And I think that by next year, we'll have a much better idea of where the hubs are, and hopefully we'll be incorporating the hydrogen hubs and shippery because it does shift the scores a decent amount. And also, I promise you, it's going to help spur more legislative activity or legislative churn and incubation in those respective states that have hydrogen hubs. And I'm going to hand it back over to Lexi.
Great, thank you. So I'm going to be talking you through how we scored them and just go over some basic results with you. So what does their final score mean? Each state received a score from 0 to 100. The highest category is an advanced policy environment, meaning they have a comprehensive and mature hydrogen ecosystem. The next category is an accelerating policy environment. So they've adopted several foundational measures and continue expanding legislative and regulatory activity. The next 2 categories, the third one is the developing policy environment. So they're in the early stages, building out a hydrogen policy foundation. They might have introduced bills, initiated studies, or passed narrow measures. Finally, the bottom one is nascent policy environment. So they have limited activity and are very early in the exploratory process, but there's lots of room for growth in these states. So the moment everyone's been waiting for, these were the results for all 50 states. As you can see, there's quite a lot of variation across them, and we will be breaking them down further in the next few slides. So this next slide does show the top 10 states. As you can see, California is number one with a score of 79, and it's actually the only state currently in the advanced policy environment. The lowest state was Alabama and Idaho with a score of 0, so that makes our maximum 79 and our minimum 0. Most states averaged around 23, which puts them in the developing market phase. So they're working through early stages of research and pilot projects to explore hydrogen potential in their state. And with that, I'll pass it on back to Roxana to break these down further for you by region.
Thank you, Lexi. So we'll just dive into the first regional results, which is this is the easiest way of really looking at the regions. What you'll see is in the darker purple, we have the advanced policy environment. Clearly, California is in the lead. California has been developing policies around hydrogen since at least 1990. And so you see that richness, right? We have nearly 30 years of experience here in California, if not beyond that, in laying the foundation of a hydrogen economy, which is why it has such a robust hydrogen economy to date. Oregon and Washington has really taken walked in lockstep, more or less a little delayed in their timeline, but very in a very similar fashion to California. And so they have similar policies. And so, there's a West Coast policy environment that is pretty similar amongst those three states, and they represent that well. What you'll see is that there's activity in the Southwest that's been activating. And, we're seeing really beautiful legislative activities in New Mexico. Arizona is a little behind. Nevada, we've been working on for quite some time. Utah, we have been working on for some time, but there's some really rich activity going on here. And I really think that we're going to see freight corridor systems being transformed to be hydrogen accessible, probably in this region first. We also see that there's a lot of activity in the Northeast, and we're going to get into that a little bit further. You see that there's New York has a higher score. And the reason for New York having a very high score is that there's been a lot of legislative activity in New York. However, the number of enacted laws are low in New York. However, hydrogen is churning in the state of New York. So we anticipate that we will be seeing how the states will be moving inward in a sense. The activities from all the states will be moving inward to really closing the gap in the central part of the country. So as we mentioned, the West Coast is thriving. They have longstanding clean energy policies, their RPS, the Renewable Portfolio Standard, the clean fuel standards. The fact that they are Section 177 states has really worked. Their focus on climate and transportation frameworks to reduce their emissions has really been pivotal as they've integrated hydrogen, because hydrogen is a zero emission solution. And then again, we've seen a lot of hydrogen relevant legislative activity, some that USHA has run themselves. And the thing about the West Coast though is that it does not apply to all environments. And but what we want to do is support the West Coast states in continuing to develop and taking their lessons learned to other states, those that can be applied to other states. But I do think that we'll see probably a lot of mirroring policies on the East Coast, particularly in the Northeast, where they have kind of a similar policy approach to climate change and other environmental policies. So we're jumping right into the Northeast. We see a lot of activity in New York, Massachusetts, New Jersey, Connecticut. We know that Connecticut is a home to many hydrogen companies, and so that is part of their legacy with supporting hydrogen. But We're seeing more of an emphasis on decarbonization. We're seeing an emphasis on industrial and power generation applications. And, they have developed roadmaps and task force that help them design their next steps into their local hydrogen economy. In the Midwest, this is where we're seeing lower scores, and activity does not mean that there isn't hydrogen activity going on there. However, this is where we could strengthen our position as an industry to develop those areas and to actually allow those states to borrow lessons learned so that they can, in a sense, almost make a quantum leap forward in incorporating hydrogen into their energy frameworks. The South has been, I think, really wonderful to work in personally. I've seen a lot of activity in Oklahoma, a lot of activity in Louisiana. Obviously, there's a lot of activity in Texas, and Texas always wants to break everybody's calculators because they have just such an interesting energy environment. But the South, you'll see that that's not a place where we're running mandates. We're not advocating for mandates. What we're looking for is incentives, and they're much more open to incentives. But this is a little bit of a tougher arena for this industry due to the lack of incentives, additional incentives that are necessary to really prop up the hydrogen industry in that region. However, we need to continue to make strides, especially political strides, in adopting hydrogen into the policy frameworks that they have established and moving on into the future. So the Mountain West and the Plains are another interesting, another interesting case study. Colorado is always a clear outlier. When we worked with Colorado, it's a great state. I think that hydrogen is well poised to be incorporated into their overall policy agenda when it comes to climate, air quality, and their other environmental considerations. The governor has been very supportive of hydrogen. However, Colorado does lack incentive funding, and that is something that we're working on figuring out how to provide more incentive funding in the state of Colorado. Utah and Wyoming have both been very interesting states. Utah has been actually pretty helpful on the hydrogen front. But again, we're seeing some conservative politics play a role where there's less incentive funding to fund the high incremental cost of hydrogen. So what does this mean going forward? So what we should all know is that hydrogen deployment is not going to scale evenly. There is, you can see who is in the lead essentially. However, there is it's possible for us to work together in order to make sure that the right policy structure is in place to have a similar momentum and move from early commercialization to full on commercialization. So we do recommend that capital be concentrated where governance is clarified. When the states that have clear guidelines on who has authority over hydrogen, what are some basic features of hydrogen, for instance, the definition of hydrogen, that is really kind of the safest place to put your capital. Also, what we think is important is that the legislative engagement that we employ is going to be really important for our timeline. So, how quickly we can quantum leap in some of these states that don't have heavy hydrogen activity, and also how do we double down and ensure that those states that have heavy hydrogen activity continue to thrive, continue to actually be um, an anchor for this industry. What we see already within our policy leaders roundtable is that regional coordination matters quite a bit. It also helps with projects not being isolated. We see legislators that are working together, sharing their lessons learned, sharing policy language, legislative language most of the time, that help inform their peers. And so what we'll see is that policy maturity is going to be tracked with the SHPRI and by USHA, but really we want the entire industry to start thinking of policy maturity when they are making their economic decisions and project planning decisions. So for us, we are going to continue tracking the policy. This is helping inform us on how to better educate our policymakers, how to share lessons learned, how we ensure that our legislators are working together, and really, most importantly, that we're building durable, nonpartisan policy templates. We do share our model legislation with our policymakers today, and we will continue to do that so that we can have as much of a uniform policy landscape on a state by state basis across the country. And that's really the focus of our Common Bond campaign. And we truly believe that it is a brick by brick, state by state effort in order to build the US hydrogen economy. So, what comes next for us? So, you can learn more about hydrogen, the common bond, and it's available online on our website. You can join our mailing list to learn more about it. We are going on a state by state capital tour across the US, over the US, which we've already kicked off last week in the state of Virginia. And we have a number of states scheduled in the coming months. And so please let us know if you're interested in joining us. It's great to share the message of how hydrogen is building real jobs, is contributing to our national security, and is actually cleaning up our environment. We need to tell our story and join us to tell that story cohesively. You can also meet us at our regional hydrogen policy leaders convention. We have both regional and national events. We're going to be having our next regional event in Detroit, Michigan on May 28th. And it is a one-day gathering. And Detroit is a beautiful place where it's just the mark of American ingenuity, and it's the perfect place to talk about hydrogen innovation. We're going to have a heavy emphasis on geologic hydrogen and offtake. We have our national convention. That is where our policy leaders roundtable of 60 plus legislators will be meeting in addition to other policymakers from around the country. It's the only convening in the hydrogen industry that has so many policymakers that you can speak to and share what your organizations work on. And our next national convention is September 8th through 10th of this year in Atlantic City. We're excited to be in New Jersey. All of our events have rotated across the country, and it's my hope to cover every state in our tenure. We have next steps for you. We do have our next webinar, which is scheduled for March 26th at the same time. And you're going to learn more about geologic hydrogen. We have our publication available, but there's going to be a special edition that's going to be released. And we're bringing experts working on geologic hydrogen, both from the policy realm as well as the state side, from the regulatory side, as well as those in the private sector. So keep an eye out for an email from USHA as well as our LinkedIn announcements. And I think we're almost done, and we're really excited to take questions from the audience. So, Lexi, thank you so much to everybody for joining us here. You can find us on LinkedIn. You can find our Policy Leaders Convention LinkedIn as well. You can find our event page, QR code on this page, as well as our homepage. We love to interact with the industry. We can't do this without you, and we hope that you rise with us to build the U.S. hydrogen economy. So thank you so much for your attention, and we're ready for questions. So Lexi, how do we open this up?
Feel free to put questions in the Q&A function or the chat, and we'll be happy to answer them.
Okay, so I did answer a few questions already. We are technology neutral. We are agnostic on every single front. We care about all colors of hydrogen and will advocate for all applications of hydrogen. With respect to any states or cities that have come up in the chat, please reach out to us. You can reach me at Roxana at ushydrogenalliance.org or Lexi at ushydrogenalliance.org. We love to come to your state that you're engaged in and tell the hydrogen story. With respect to our hydrogen definition, actually, Lexi, I'm keen to, since we have more time than I anticipated, if you don't mind actually bringing up our definition, our handout that we share with legislators, I'm totally excited to share that publicly. You can understand that right now, clean hydrogen may even clean hydrogen may be controversial in this current state that we're in, but regardless, we still have our clean hydrogen definition for those states that want to include cleanliness, some sort of cleanliness standard in their hydrogen definition. Um, Okay, so I have just really real quickly, New Mexico is a great opportunity. I'm glad that there's some discussion about New Mexico. The governor's office has been fantastic. There's a lot of interest since bef basically 2020, and even probably a little bit before then in New Mexico. We've been very lucky to work with the state of New Mexico on multiple fronts. They do have a very short legislative session, which makes that aspect of advocacy with them a little difficult. However, New Mexico is a great place. I think it's underrated. They have a clean fuel standard there. They're trying to get cap and trade passed there. There's a lot of strong policy indicators and signals, essentially, that New Mexico is a place to really invest in. So, um, with respect to geologic hydrogen is coming up quite a bit with our legislative discussions. I know that at our last convention, geologic hydrogen data centers and Mm, I would say those two topics were the hottest topics amongst our legislators, and they wanted more and more information, which is why we're focusing on it more with our Detroit event and our next webinar. There's a lot of standardization that needs to occur for the geologic hydrogen industry, and we're excited to be a part of it. Okay. Do we have a list of enacted legislation specific bill states to have a deeper look? We do. I call it our IP. It's been a repository that we've developed over the entirety of our organization. Our members do have access to it, and I'm sorry that I don't make it public, but as of right now, it is an internal resource. So I think I answered all of the questions in the webinar chat as well as the Q&A. Carolyn, yes, I think we can go ahead and share the slides. Um, Roy, on light duty vehicles and their tunnels, we are actually going to Massachusetts. That is our second stop, actually. We're going to be discussing this during our discussion with state legislators, and we're actually bringing a hydrogen safety expert from our membership, Jensen Hughes, to discuss specifically that topic. So thank you for bringing it up. But I think we're loosening things there. Um, with the question in the audience about what we're planning on policy terms for geologic and natural hydrogen, we have actually already disseminated model legislation language for geologic hydrogen to all of our policymakers. We will continue to standardize that language. And we are hoping to have something even more comprehensive for the 2027 session. So, but reach out to us for more information. Oh, Lexi, sorry. I know that I had kind of moved around a little bit, but can we have the clean hydrogen definition back up? Okay, so what I want to explain this to everybody. This is really important here. You might be familiar with certain states or the federal government that's flush with all these government employees, but a lot of states do not have the same kind of resources. So I want to give you an example. Um, so when we look at those that are working on just a low carbon fuel standard in California, that team is at least 40 people and a team of 1,700 government employees working just for the California Air Resources Board. When you look at the state of Nevada, their Department of Energy is roughly 10 people deep. So you have to understand that most of the states do not have the same resources to quantify carbon intensity. That is in addition to the fact that some states don't even acknowledge climate change or carbon intensity in the first place. So we developed essentially two definitions, one that's quantified and one that's not quantified, more qualitative. So this is why our proposal says, does your state have the ability to evaluate carbon intensity? If so, what we do is we do actually harmonize uh, with the federal standard of the 4 kilograms of carbon dioxide equivalent per kilogram of hydrogen, but we do spell it out all the different sources that clean hydrogen can come from to make sure that it is inclusive. We have never been a fan of legislation or special interest legislation that has been passed in certain states that narrowly define the definition of hydrogen. We do not ever use color schemes in our proposals, and we never will. And so we are, again, advocating for technology neutral legislation. Now, however, you should understand that USHA is different than state level organizations that focus on state level dynamics. So we do and have proposed this legislation, let's say in states like Washington, but of course the Washington environment is very different. However, we hope that in the long term that all states will have a harmonized definition of clean hydrogen. And then the not the qualitative definition, Lexi, is on the second page. Thank you. And so what we do is we remove that number, that quantification of carbon intensity, but have the same definition. And what's really important here is that we give authority to the state agency that is implementing any of these policies to define clean hydrogen as well. And so that gives us an opportunity, an open opportunity for what? The evolution of technology in the space and also greater judgment and discernment by the state agencies to take ownership of how they want hydrogen to be incorporated in their state. That is a positive. And so what we're ensuring is that these definitions are inclusive because at the US Hydrogen Alliance, if we're not making responsible hydrogen policies, then I don't know what's the point of our existence. So um, let me see if there's any more questions. There is a lot of interest in hydrogen blending with natural gas. We have actually talked about a policy subcommittee for our policy leaders roundtable. If you have interest in talking to us a little bit further about that, please let us know. Hydrogen blending is an important attribute of the US hydrogen economy. And there's other things that we're working on specifically with pipeline legislation that's going to be really important as well. So we are concerned about hydrogen from its very inception, the minute that you're producing it, to its very end use. And that is going to include what's in the middle there, which is distribution infrastructure. Distribution infrastructure is going to be key, and it's part of our long-term policy strategy to make sure that we are legislating and bringing into fruition hydrogen pipelines and within states and interstate wise. So that gets a little complicated with interstate, but it's important that we have these regional networks. Thank you, Lexi, for including more links in the chat. Let me see if Bill, I will send you some more information. And for all of you that are interested in having more detailed conversations with us, again, you can reach me at roxana@ushydrogenalliance.org, as well as lexi@ushydrogenalliance.org. And I believe we've answered all questions, Lexi. Is there anything else that we need to cover before we close in less than 3 minutes?
I don't have anything else unless anyone else has any remaining questions. It does look like maybe if you just popped into the Q&A, Roxana. And if there's any links that would be helpful for me to paste in the chat, just let me know as well.
Yes, with High Blend, we have talked to folks in that effort, and I think we have like a decent relationship with all the national labs, and we're very supportive of the national labs. Um, and we've actually had national labs testify as educators in some of our legislative work. Uh, so I hope I answered that question. And Lexi, is there anything else that I did not cover?
Nope, just someone else thanking us for our time. I have nothing else. And if so, like Roxana mentioned, you have our contact information if you want to follow up with us directly. But from me, I just have thank you so much for all of your time and for asking us great questions and being engaged.
Thank you, everyone. You'll be receiving this recording shortly, as well as the document. And we hope that you can share this with your friends. We would love to socialize this across the US hydrogen industry because it's critical. This is our baseline. We're anchoring into something solid, something quantified. And this allows us to really truly see how the US hydrogen economy will flourish, how it will develop, and you're all part of that solution. So thank you so much for your time, your attention, your support, and we look forward to working with you. Thank you. Bye from the US Hydrogen Alliance.